Bible Answers with Dr. Al Garza.
Welcome back to Bible Answers. I am your host, Dr. Al Garza. So today, we're going to be discussing an article or a blog that was sent to me by this Troy Salinger individual trying to refute my arguments from the debate I had with Carlos on Psalm 110, verse 1. This is interesting because this was sent to me by actually Troy here, and he wanted me to post this or link it to my YouTube channel with the debate. And I told him I wouldn't until I actually read the blog and make sure it was represented, that it was representing my arguments accurately and not misrepresenting it. So as I read through the blog, I found a number of problems, a number of issues that he basically did not accurately portray my arguments correctly, and that he misrepresented a lot of what I said. And so when I looked at the blog, I realized by his description that he did not fully understand the debate. Now, he claims he watched it numerous times, but I can tell you from the blog, which we're going to go over, that he totally missed everything I said, and that he is completely writing from a Unitarian position, trying to force his position into the text and in my arguments without even answering my arguments or my objections to Carlos. So I'm going to go through this. I want to show you something real quick here. I want to show you who Troy is by his own words, not mine. So I'm going to scroll down here. It's a lot, so this is probably one of my longer videos on this blog. So I apologize, but normally I don't do that long, but I have a feeling this was actually going to be a long one. But about the author, he says that he's 59 years old, and of course he's married, and he lives in Mississippi. He's been a believer in Jesus since 1981. He says, I have no formal theological education, but have been an ardent student of the scriptures for over 40 years. And I'm a biblical Unitarian. So he admits he has no formal theological education, no training, which you're going to see in his blog. It shows. He makes a lot of fundamental errors in the Hebrew, Aramaic, even in the Greek. My position, he does not. He doesn't answer my arguments or questions that I gave to Carlos. He does a lot of red herrings. He goes off on different areas and doesn't address what I say. But you can tell he doesn't have any training in the languages, in Semitic languages. You can tell he's not been trained in that way. He admits it. So I'm going to show you how he misrepresents what I said, probably out of ignorance of not being formally trained in the languages. And so I'm going to gradually go through this. So I don't want to spend, I don't want to go through the whole entire thing. I'm going to go through quite a bit, most of it. There's some parts here that just I don't even want to deal with. For example, this opening, he talks about that he is surprised to hear me offer such a weak case in my opening presentation, and that I appeared to be unenthusiastic and half-hearted because I cut my time short. I didn't go the full 10 minutes. And so he talked about my main 4 points, all of which were weak and unconvincing. Well, again, he's already drawn his conclusion without even going into my arguments right here in the opening. So it's kind of, a little bit of, say begging the question in this sense, or, a little bit, but you're going to see a lot of fallacies committed here, and not only misrepresenting what I said, but also in the fact that his lack of education in the languages shows in this article. So let me scroll down here and deal with this first part. He says right here, Garza's case refuted. He says Garza's main argument in this debate was that the original reading of Psalm 110:1 did not say Yahweh to my Lord, Hebrew la Adoni, which could refer to a man, as we have it in the Masoretic text, but rather Yahweh said to the Lord, Hebrew la Adonai, which must refer to God. So first off the bat, he got this wrong. I did not say in the debate the original reading should be Yahweh said to the Lord. I never said there was an article there, whether it be in Hebrew, ha'adon, the Lord, or in the Greek, hakurios, the Lord. I said the Hebrew is la Adonai, which any Hebrew scholar or even first-year Hebrew student will tell you that La Adonai is plural and means my lords, plural. So La Adoni right here on top, to my Lord is my Lord here is La Adoni singular, while Adonai is plural, my lords. So again, this is not to the Lord. In fact, in my opening, I made it clear that if you put the Hebrew for Adonai and Adoni together, they are spelled the same. You cannot make any distinction between them in their spelling. It is only by the vocalization or those little dashes and dots you see under the Hebrew letters that tells you if it's Adoni or Adonai. So that's based on the scribes telling you. But if you just look at Adonai and Adoni without the points or without the nikud, then you cannot tell them apart unless you interpret them as either my Lord, singular, Adoni, or my lords, plural, or even with Adonai. Or most, of course, in translation in English, Adonai is traditionally translated as my Lord, singular, with a capital L. So as he puts here, the capital L, that is correct for identifying Adonai. Lowercase l, like what you see here, is identifying Adoni in English most of the time. So this right here off the bat is wrong. I never said that. In fact, even when I cross-examined Carlos, I even made that point to Carlos that there is no distinction and that one is singular, one is plural. And he knows this. Any Hebrew scholar will tell you they don't write it as my lords, typically in translation, even though there are places where it is, because it's not referring to them as the plural nature of God, but as my Lord, capital L, to identify it's talking to about God himself. And the Jews today substitute Adonai with Yahweh. So instead of saying Yahweh, or in some cases Yehovah, they say Adonai in place of the name. But no one said this here. This is wrong. Apparently he doesn't know what Adonai means, it looks like, because he's not representing it correctly here. It should be Yahweh said to my Lord, capital L, not to the Lord. That would be Ha'adon, the Lord. So he's not, obviously, this first part shows that he's not educated enough in the language to be able to discern this difference that I never said. So then he goes on to say his first line of defense for this assertion is the fact that Matthew 22, verse 43 and 45, Jesus is recorded as saying that David in the psalm called the Messiah Lord. Again, this is wrong. It's not Adoni in the Greek, in the Aramaic, or even in some of the Hebrew Matthew manuscripts we have. Rather than my Lord. Again, no capital here. To Dr. Al Garza's mind, this means that the text that Jesus knew in his day did not contain La Adoni, to my Lord. Again, but La Adonai, to the Lord. Again, it's not to the Lord. It's not Ha'adon. Again, this is wrong. Fundamentals of Hebrew. My Lord, capital L, is Adonai. For if the text had said La Adoni, then Jesus would have said that David called him my Lord. But since Matthew recorded Jesus as saying that David called the Messiah Lord, again, this is Adoni. I didn't say that. Should be capital L for Adonai. Then this is proof that the text of Jesus did read La Adonai instead of La Adoni. Again, we'll deal with that later. But again, he misrepresents with the article. What I said that Jesus is saying, excuse me, what I said was that before Jesus quotes a psalm in Matthew 22, verse 44, in 45 he referenced, and you could check this out, he says that in the Spirit David called him Lord. And then he finishes it, how is the son of David if David calls him Lord? The question I had is, what is Lord there? What is Lord there in the Greek and in the Aramaic and even in Hebrew, since we have some of the Hebrew New Testament manuscripts of Matthew? Well, I pointed out, if you go to Psalm 110 and you look at the first line where it says Yahweh said, or just say Yahweh, that Yahweh in Greek, of course, is Kurios, is HaKurios, the Lord, or Kurios. And in the Peshitta, in the Aramaic, it is Maria. Some people say Maria, but it's Maria. And that is a substitute, in cases, substituting the name Yahweh for the Aramaic Maria. Now, if you go to what Jesus said, he actually says either kurios in the Greek or Maria in the Peshitta, in the Aramaic. So when you see this, what I pointed out was is that Jesus did not say my Lord before quoting Psalm Adoni, or he didn't say Kiriomu, my Lord in the Greek. He said Maria, according to the Peshitta, or Kurios, which is in Psalm 110, referencing Yahweh himself. So again, my question is, why did Jesus say that? If he wanted to say David calls him my Lord, he would have said Adoni in Hebrew, if we had the text, or he would have said if the Greek translation would have been Kiriomu, or it would have been in the Peshitta Marie. Marie is my Lord, which is referencing Adoni, and Maria is what's substituted in Psalm 110 for Yahweh. So Jesus did not say either one of those, my Lord. He said Kurios and Maria in Aramaic, according to the scribes who translated. So that is my point. Again, he misrepresents the Lord. I never said the Lord. It's not Ha'adon there. You might have modern Hebrew New Testament that might put Ha'adon, but not in this case. And we do have a Hebrew Matthew manuscript, there's a few of them that have Adonai there that supports what I said, that there was a scribe who thought that's what Jesus was referring to, Adonai. So again, this is a lack of training in the languages that you can see and a lack of understanding of what I actually said. He misrepresented it, what I said. I never said the Lord, and I made it clear that if you go to Psalm 110:1 and you compare Yahweh there with what Jesus said in the Greek, and you compare it with the Septuagint and the Aramaic in Psalm 110:1, and you compare it to what Jesus said in Matthew 22, they are the same. They are exactly the same before Jesus quotes the Psalm. So that was my argument, which he does not answer, he does not deal with. He tries to sidestep it, which we're going to see. But again, here's how he explains it. Well, I must say that this is not a very strong argument. Again, it's his opinion. Anybody who compares Psalm 110:1 with the name Yahweh, and they compare that name Yahweh with the Septuagint and the Aramaic, and they compare it to what Jesus said, they are the same. So that's a very strong argument because they parallel each other and they are exactly the same. Why should we assume that if David called the Messiah my Lord, Jesus would have to say that David called him my Lord? Well, because Jesus is affirming the Psalm that David called him my Lord, because David, the Lord said to, David is saying to my Lord. David is calling the Messiah my Lord. So Jesus, yes, I would think would in knowing that, would have said that if that was truly the case in the sense of what Jesus was trying to say. And that it would be inaccurate for Jesus to simply say David called him Lord, if in fact David called him my Lord. Jesus' point is that David called the Messiah by the title Lord, not that he specifically said either my Lord. Again, this is little case L. This is what he says Adoni. It's not Adoni. Again, lack of understanding of the Hebrew. Not that he specifically said either my Lord or simply Lord. In fact, there is another passage in the New Testament which parallels this passage in Matthew and shows Dr. Garza's argument to be irrelevant. This made me laugh because he claims that 1 Peter 3:6 is a parallel to what Jesus said in Matthew 22. I don't know where his education comes from, but a parallel has nothing to do with what he's saying here. 1 Peter 3:6. And here's what he says. He quotes, like Sarah who obeyed Abraham and called him Lord. Here are the two passages in Greek. Now he deals with kurion, and of course kurion, and he says, now we see that the two passages are identical except for the different forms of kaleo. Now here is the thing I want you to see. The only place in the Hebrew Bible that Peter could have been referring to is Genesis 18:12, which reads, if I am worn out and my Lord is old, shall I have pleasure? Now, let me say this is not a parallel. That's not how parallel works. When a parallel grammatically means that there are two very similar passages in wording and in context. So Psalm 110:1 is a parallel to Matthew 22 because they're using in context referencing, Jesus is referencing back to Psalm 1 and what David said. So David calling the Messiah Lord and then quoting it in David, that's a parallel to Psalm 110. Those three verses. to Psalm 110. This is not a parallel. He's trying to make a connection by a single word, kurios, and trying to say, well, David is called, Abraham is called kurios by Sarah, therefore it's irrelevant because then David, he's trying to make this is what we call a red herring, and a red herring fallacy. If you don't know what a red herring is, please Google it. Just Google what is a red herring. This is exactly what he's doing. He's doing a red herring. He's saying, look over here. There's no real connection to Psalm 110, but there is a word here that's used over here the same way. Therefore, they are connected. That is not what a parallel is. A parallel is what Jesus said about Psalm and David, and then even quotes the Psalm. That's a parallel. So this person has no idea what a parallel is from the scriptures, and he has no idea from the language about the difference between Adoni, my Lord, versus Adonai, my Lord or my Lord, with a capital L, and the difference between Ha'adon, the Lord. So this is sad because this has something to do with the parallel here. He likes to try and make that, but there is none, simply because you can find a Greek word used the same way, which I can find kurios used in all the different forms, all throughout the Old Testament, Septuagint, and that doesn't mean they're all connected, meaning the same thing. That is really very, very bad, very bad exegete. This is more of a red herring eisegete trying to force his view because he found a similar word. That's not how it works. So it's not an exact parallel. Very, very, very bad in trying to do this. Now he says here, is Dr. Garza going to claim based on 1 Peter 3:6 that the original Hebrew of Genesis 12 must have read Adon instead of Adonai? I think not. This point by Dr. Garza is therefore invalidated. There is no invalidation. This has nothing to do with what we're talking about in Matthew 22 or in Psalm 110. This is a red herring. He's stretching it here because he's finding a similar Greek word which has nothing to do with the context. Context is a parallel with the words. Okay, so his next point is that there is no rabbinic commentaries that ascribe Psalm 110 to the Messiah. He states that the rabbinic interpretation is that the Lord, whom Yahweh invites to sit at his right hand, is Abraham, and he quotes Rashi to that effect. He then makes the claim that is based on this tradition, understanding of the psalm is referring to Abraham, that the scribes added the vowels to make the word Adoni rather than Adonai, which is supposedly used exclusively for God. For those who may not know, the original Hebrew text consisted of only consonants. I made that point already. I said Adonai and Adoni are spelled exactly the same, and it is only by the pointings that you can identify either Adoni or Adonai. That was the opening part of my whole argument and my cross-examination. So why he's trying to put this as a refuting of me, I have no idea. The proper vocalization of scriptures was passed down by tradition, and vowel pointings were added to the text by the Masoretes between the 7th and 10th centuries based on that tradition. In the original, without the vowel pointings, there would have been no distinction between Adoni and Adonai except by the tradition of vocalization. What Dr. Garza is claiming is that when they added the vowel points to Psalm 110, they did so purposely based on the tradition that the psalm referred to Abraham, hence Adoni, a word that can refer to men, rather than Adonai, a word that refers to God. So yes, what I stated here, he says this is a bold assertion, but what proof does he offer for it? Well, the only supposed proof that he kept referring to throughout the debate is the fact that rabbinic tradition applied the psalm to Abraham. But this is simply begging the question. Again, look up what begging the question means. That is, what I did is not begging the question. What I stated is that the early rabbinic tradition of Psalm 110:1 before the Aleppo and the Masoretic text was written down with the dots and the dashes, the earliest we have with the oral tradition that became the Talmud is that it was Abraham and or David as the Adoni in Psalm 110:1. And it mentions Rabbi Akiva all the way down through the Talmud. And then when the Talmud was then put down in written form between the 2nd and 4th century, or 5th century, you could say, then it became more clear in writing. But oral tradition that dates back to the 1st century was that it was Abraham. And that's the proof I gave. I said before the Aleppo and the Leningrad Codex, before both of them, the tradition was found in the Talmud of the oral tradition dating back to the time of Jesus. which was Abraham and in some case David. After that, during the medieval rabbis, you might find references about the Messiah being at the right hand or the right side of God and Abraham on the left or so. This is after that fact, but the commentaries of Psalm 110:1 before the Aleppo and Leningrad and in the Talmud was that it was Abraham/David or David. Now, he doesn't seem to understand that. Again, he misrepresents what I said. He says that I provided no proof. That is proof, because when a scribe is coming to Psalm 110:1 and he's ready to put the dashes and dots, as a scribe, he understands the Talmud oral tradition that Adoni here to them is Abraham, and in some cases even David, but it's referring to a person of either one. And he puts La Adoni. So that is what I said, that we can explain why Jesus is saying something different before he quotes Psalm 110, and the Rabbinic tradition reflects that. That is proof. That is hard evidence of a tradition passing down into the Masoretic texts of the Aleppo and the Leningrad. So then he says here, how can the fact that a Rabbinic tradition that Abraham is the referent of Psalm 110 prove that the original text read Adonai instead of Adoni? Dr. Garza simply assumes it because that's how he wants to be. No, I didn't want. That's what the proof, that's what the evidence shows based on the Talmud and the oral tradition before the Aleppo and the Leningrad. Apparently this person doesn't understand that is evidence. All the way down. The scribes were not Messianic believers in Jesus. So they wouldn't have looked at it that way. They would have looked at it as the traditional Talmud oral tradition of what the rabbis taught, as even Rashi says. Are there any rabbinic sources admitting that the scribes pointed the vowels for the express purpose of aligning the text with the tradition with their tradition interpretation of the text? He doesn't provide any because they don't exist. Again, this is an argument from silence. What I stated is that why would you find a scribe saying, oh, I'm writing this Adoni here because it's about Abraham? That's what the commentaries are for. The commentaries tell you why it's Adoni. I'm not sure if he understands that. So if a rabbi is reading this and saying, let me go to the Talmud for the commentary. Oh, look, Abraham, David, Abraham, the Midrash, Abraham. That is what they're going by. So when the scribe is writing it as well, they're familiar with the oral traditions that were set in the Talmud that dates back to, they would have understood that. So in their mind, yes, that's why there's no reason to explain it when it's part of their rabbinic tradition. Again, this person this is what you get when you deal with someone who's not formally trained in theology and the linguistic studies and the Semitic languages. This is what you get, or the culture and the context of what's being said here. You get a lot of this type of ridiculous comments. It is much more rational to reason that based on tradition of vocalization, which reads Psalm 110:1 as Adoni rather than Adonai, that they interpret it as referring to Abraham because they believed, this is and David and Saul, because they believed based on the traditional vocalization that it referred to a man, not to God. Isn't that kind of what I just said? Dr. Garza claims it's simply preposterous. Not only that, but that his claim that there is no rabbinic tradition which refers to the Messiah is false. Here are some sources. Now, again, I don't understand this because he actually says what I already said. He said it's more rational to say that Adoni, that they interpret as referring to Abraham based on vocalization. That's what I said. I believe, and as much as more rational to reason that based on the tradition of vocalization, right, that vocalization is also based on what they believe the text was saying in context, that their commentaries say it's Abraham. That's why the vocalization is Adoni, which he's kind of affirming, but he's leaving the commentary out. It as Adoni, rather, that they interpret it as referring to Abraham because they believed based on that traditional vocalization. Yes, and their commentaries and their understanding of what Psalm 10:1 said Adonai, who Adonai was. Abraham, as he just agreed. That is referred to a man. Yes, Abraham, David, Saul, a man, not to God. So again, he actually affirmed what I said and doesn't realize it because I said it's based on the vocalization and the understanding of the commentaries before it was penned in the Aleppo and Leningrad Codex, in the Masoretic text. So, and then he quotes a couple of sources. Just I've looked these up. Some of these are wrong. I went to the original source and translated it myself. Some of these are not correct. He uses Psalm 10:2. We're not talking about Psalm 10:2. Psalm 10:2. We're talking about Psalm 10:1. So this part, I mean, this to me has no relevance. Even some of these. Here is my point in all this. I'm talking about the earliest. You can find medieval rabbis later on debating about these things, about Messiah, and they call this in Hebrew, they say this is a remez, sometimes, or a prototype of Abraham and David is the Messiah. So sometimes when it's talked about Abraham, that could be the Messiah. But traditionally, when you're looking at the simple reading of the text, which is the Peshat, the simple meaning of Pardes, Peshat, it is Abraham, David, or David, that it's referring to, and then they do a remez. They say, well, this is also can talk about the Messiah in a remez form. I'm not talking about the remez. I'm talking about how they understood the pashat, the simple meaning of the text prior. Everything else here is, we can say, after the Aleppo Leningrad, after when commentaries, when they talked about, when they talk about in a prayer, or they talk about the Messiah, the end of days, or signs to come, which some of this references, They implement the Messiah at the right hand and Abraham on the left, and so forth. Some rabbis did that later, but the original earliest tradition we have before the Aleppo and Leningrad Codex was Abraham, and that the Adoni there from the Pashat is Abraham. And then from the Remez, later on, Remez, yes, you could say, well, at the end of days, the Messiah will be standing at the right hand of the Messiah. Yes, that's later. That's not what my argument is. Again, this is a red herring. It doesn't address the issues. The fact that Rabbi could refer to Psalm to Messiah, knowing that the traditional localization read Adoni, shows us that they regard the Messiah who was to come, strictly as a human being, not as God. On the top of the bank sources, the very fact that Jesus uses Psalm 110 as recorded in Matthew 21, 41 through 45, proves that the Jewish leaders of that day must have considered the Psalm Messianic. Well, that's his opinion, because when they asked who the son of the Messiah was, whose son is he, they said the son of the son of David. That means he's just a human being. And why did Jesus have to correct that? Because if he is just the son of David, a regular human being from that line, that lineage, then they were correct. He is the son of David. Why did Jesus have to correct them? And then they kept silent when the translator, the scribe, put Kurios or Maria. Again, they were silent. This goes against what he just said. It doesn't make sense what he's saying here. Jesus' purpose in applying the psalm to Messiah would have been completely moot if those to whom he was speaking did not regard the psalm as messianic. No, because the Pharisees, the religious leaders and the Pharisees did not quote Psalm 110:1. They just they answered the question that the Messiah is the son of David. And Jesus is saying, then how can he be just the son if David is calling him by the title? Now, he uses, again, two different titles before quoting the psalm, which, again, is going by the vocalization of the tradition of what we have in the Masoretic text. And, of course, in Matthew, the scribe following that same tradition. It doesn't prove what he's saying here. Again, this is why Jesus corrected him, in my opinion of why Jesus had to correct him, because he's not just the son of David. He is more than that. And the more than that is that David is referring to him in the Psalm 110. Now, we're going to talk about verse 5 and other things, but that's the point originally. So he cannot be just a human if David's referring to him and that God is talking to him. Dr. Garza's next point is where we start to see some sleight of hand. He asserts that we can know that Psalm 110 is originally La Adonai, to the Lord. Again, this should be to my Lord, capital L. There's no article here. Again, I don't understand why he keeps making this simple fundamental error of Hebrew instead of La Adoni, to my Lord. Because in all the Psalms, La Adoni appears nowhere else, but Adonai does, as if to strengthen this claim, he makes the following statements. And he quotes me. David wrote La Adonai in every other place in the Psalms. When we look at all the other places in the book of Psalms where La Adonai appears, we can see that David intended to we can see what David intended to write. Did David intend to write La Adoni in any other place in all 150 Psalms. So he's argued that because I pointed out that in all of 150 Psalms we have, and I actually quoted the passages here, which I didn't try to hide anything, because I said I gave the 3 verses for the spelling of La Adonai. 2 of them are La Adonai, and 1 of them is La Adonai, which still refers to God in the context, to Yahweh himself. It's just a different vocalization with different pointings. But the 2 other places in all 150 Psalms is La Adonai. So what I'm saying is, if you want to find La Adonai, to the Lord, to Adonai, to my Lord, with a capital L, it's only in 2 other places vocalized that way, and the last one is La Adonai, same spelling though in Hebrew, but just the dots put it to Yahweh as Adonai. So my point was, you don't find anywhere else La Adoni in that respect of Psalm 110:1. And then again, I supported that with verse 5 of Psalm 110:1, saying that Adonai is at your right hand, which we'll talk about because that affirms verse 1 for me for La Adonai. So I just showed 2 proof texts of La Adonai, to my Lord, capital L, to show that that is a consistent understanding from David's writing and how the scribes understood the other places of La Adonai instead of La Adoni. So note the underlying sections here. Do you get the impression that there must be many places in Psalms where La Adonai occurs? No, because he doesn't put that I actually quoted in my opening the 3 verses. There's no sleight of hand here. I quoted in my opening. Go back and watch my debate, and I have my opening in front of me, and I have also Carlos's opening and my questions. I said specifically in my opening, and I'll read it to you right here. I said David wrote La Adonai for Yahweh in every other place in the Psalms. And I said cross-reference Psalm 22:31, 136, 136:3. But I also said uses Adonai for Yahweh. One can see the tradition that added. So I quoted and referenced the 2 places and the 3rd with the same spelling but vocalized differently. So that's what I did. And I actually put it here. Now, he's saying I was trying to make it sound like there were a lot of places. I never said there were a lot of places, and I never made that claim. If he took it that way, then that's on him. Well, if so, you would be wrong. In fact, the word occurs twice in Psalms, and he quotes him here. So Garza's argument, which let me see if he actually quoted that correctly. Psalm 22:30, yeah. He leaves out the last one because the vocalization is different, but the spelling is the same. And it is referred to Yahweh as well. So Garza's argument seems to be that because La Adonai is used by David in 2 other Psalms in 110, that then 110:1 must read La Adonai instead of La Adonai. No, really, that is his argument. Not only is this a weak argument, but he doesn't answer it, but it borders on ridiculous. I'm stunned that someone would not see the silliness of such an argument. By what logic does the fact that David intended to write La Adonai in 2 places in the Psalms mean that he didn't intend to write La Adonai in another psalm? What a text reads is not determined by how many other times the same word is used, either in the same book or in any of the books of the Bible. This made me laugh because he did this with 1 Peter earlier when he found a verse in 1 Peter and said, look, 1 Peter is quoting Genesis 18. It's La Adonai, and it is Kurios. Therefore, that's a parallel. And he did the same exact thing by looking for one verse in 1 Peter and connecting it with Genesis and then trying to impose it as a parallel with Psalm 110:1 and Matthew 22. That is to me hilarious, because there is no connection between them parallels, and what he's claiming I did, he actually did himself in a very, very red herring, non-parallel way that you can't even make no connection. At least I was consistent with La Adonai used in another place in the Psalm to show a consistency of the usage with La Adonai, the prefix for to my Lord, with the capital L for Adonai. In fact, of this matter is this, that in every Hebrew text, in every Greek text, and the Peshitta, Psalm 110 reads, to my Lord. To postulate that it should read to the Lord, again, this is wrong, bad Hebrew here. Based on such weak arguments, Dr. Garza presented this debate is to leave the realm reality of the world of fantasy. Well, apparently he's in that same world of fantasy, because he actually did that with 1 Peter and all that, and he ignored, again, he doesn't answer my argument. He's just attacking my arguments with being weak and fantasy and poor. I mean, he's not dealing with them. In fact, when he says this in Psalm 110, reads to my Lord, this part's wrong. And yes, from the Greek of what David said according to the Psalm vocalizations, Adoni. What my argument was, but Jesus did not use that. He used what was the name for Yahweh in the Greek and in the Peshitta, the Aramaic. He used that in Matthew 22, verse 23 and 25. Which he never addressed it. Well, he will address it, but he doesn't answer it. So he says here, next, he attempts to strengthen his case by appealing to verse 5 of the Psalm, which reads, the Lord, Adonai, is at your right hand. He will crush the kings of David's earth. Dr. Garza says, David describes Adonai at the right hand of Yahweh, referencing back to verse 1. Which is true, I did. He then states that in the New Testament only, Jesus is depicted at the right hand of God. That is true. And Carlos admitted it, implying that Jesus must be Adonai. He also states that Yahweh is never mentioned as being at the right hand of the Messiah. That is true. Carlos affirmed it. You're not going to find it. The problem that Dr. Garza is going to have is that verse 5 and 7 is somewhat ambiguous, ambiguous to him because he's a Unitarian, and open to multiple interpretations. Multiple interpretations from who? Unitarians? Non-Trinitarians? Yeah, that's what you're going to get. Such passages are not at all conducive for the use as proofs. One interpretation given by the NET Bible commentary takes Adonai as a reference to Yahweh. Yeah, and we believe that Jesus is Adonai and Yahweh by nature. So, yeah. Excuse me. So who is being addressed? Hence, O Lord, at your right hand, so forth, strikes down the king in the days of his wrath. Verse 6 and 7 then would be referring to the king who sits at Yahweh's right hand. And that's not what the context says. O Lord, at your right hand. The Hebrew is clear. That's Adonai who is at the right hand. I'm not sure what he's trying to get here with his interpretation of this from the Bible. O Lord, at your right hand, he, the king, strikes down. So he's trying to imply that there could be a comma there, and this is O Yahweh vocalized. No, there's no evidence of that in the Hebrew. There's no evidence that for what the text says. It's Adonai who is at your right hand. You can read the Hebrew literally for yourself. I'm not sure. Again, I'll look at the Net Bible commentary. That's an opinion. That's fine. But again, I don't know why he's relying on a Net Bible that's also Trinitarian, but oh well. Another possible explanation is to see Adonai as Yahweh as being at the right hand of the king. Dr. Garza claims that Yahweh's, for example, that Yahweh is never mentioned as being at the Messiah's right hand. Well, yes and no. There is no passage specifically about the Messiah which mentions Yahweh being at his right hand. But in Psalm 16, David, as Israel's king and Yahweh's anointed, stated that Yahweh is at his right hand. Again, this is red herring. It's going off. I didn't say it doesn't exist in the Old Testament. My point is, this is a Messianic verse that says that Adonai is at your right hand. Verse 1 is the Messiah who is at the right hand. And only in the New Testament do we only find the Messiah who is at the right hand after the resurrection, that he now sits at the right hand of God. That is consistent in Acts and all the other places, that it is Yahweh, the Lord himself, who is at the right hand of that the Messiah is at his right hand. So he appeals again to a red herring of going off somewhere else. That, well, over here David is. It says that the Yahweh is at the right hand of David. Therefore, this verse 5 can refer to the same thing. Again, it's Messianic. It's interpretation. His interpretation, that's fine if he wants to read it that way. I don't see it that way. So difference of opinion, no problem. But here's the interesting part. He then says, there's no reason why Psalm 110:5 could not be understood in this way. The Net Bible Commentary gives you a third option, to revocalize Adonai as Adoni to match verse 1. So what he's criticizing me of doing, changing Adoni to Adonai, he's okay if the Net Bible Commentary reverses it and says, well, we want to change verse 5 Adonai to Adoni. Let's revocalize that to fit our doctrine of Unitarianism. That's okay. But if I'm doing it, then it's, I'm off the rails and this. This is what made me laugh, because he's actually saying This would make verse 5 as well as verse 5 and 6 addressed to Yahweh but about the king. But he says, well, to vocalize Adonai as Adoni, to match verse 1, this would make verse 5 as well as verse 6 and 7 addressed to Yahweh but about the king. In any case, Dr. Garza's understanding of the text is not at all certain and therefore a weak proof of the debate thesis. Oh, it's certain. He just doesn't want to understand it or see it or even give it any kind of serious consideration because he can't. He's a Unitarian. Again, this is his position. But yet he has no problem with maybe revocalizing verse 5, which made me laugh because that's okay to do if it fits your Unitarian view. I think, like I said, is that the vocalization follows rabbinic tradition, and that's why Jesus didn't say my Lord twice before quoting Psalm. He actually uses Psalm 110:1 substitute name for God, kurios for Yahweh, God, kurios for Yahweh, and Maria for Yahweh, and in the verses 43 and 45. That's my whole point. So he never answers that. He can't explain that away. That's his problem here. But here's his next point. He says his next point, referring to me, is another case of sleight of hand. I guess I'm doing a lot of sleight of hand. I'm doing a lot of magic here. He quotes from the Targum on Psalm 110:1 and states that it refers to Adoni as the word. He quotes it as saying Yahweh said at him or with him the word. In quoting it like this, he gives the impression that the my Lord in the Hebrew text is replaced with the word in the Targum, the Memra. He then goes on to show that Jesus is referred to as the word of the New Testament, but this is completely false. The Aramaic text of the Targum actually has the word Rabbon and Rabbonah and not Memra as translation for Adoni. Here's how the English translation of the Aramaic text reads. Again, this is off the internet. He's looking for he can't read the languages. Excuse me. He can't read from the language, and therefore he has to rely on other third-party sources to kind of give him that way. Composed by David a psalm, the Lord said in his decree to make me Lord of all Israel. Now he's saying here, to make me, David, Lord, that this is Adoni, and this is, of course, Ribbon and Ribbonah. Excuse me. A little congested today. So, now, of course, that's not my argument. My argument was that the Lord was speaking to his word. And the Targum says that who he was speaking to, which was in the Hebrew Adoni, is the Memra. That's who he's speaking with. But the Memra is identified in the Old Testament as Elohim in numerous places in the Aramaic Targum. This is why I said John 1:1 is referring to when the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, next to, beside God, and the Word was God. That's who Yahweh was speaking to, the Word. I mentioned that because in the Targum, yes, they referred to David as the Adoni there, or as the one, the master and ruler, that this was about David, not the Messiah. So again, he affirms what I said with the Targum, but he tries to, again, this is a red herring. We're not discussing the Ribbon there, or the Ribbonah, or for David. But yes, this does confirm that the Targum believed, which predates Jesus, by the way, that Psalm 110:1 was about David. That David, he was talking about himself. And that the Lord was speaking to the word there. He doesn't mention that. He doesn't deal with that. This is a red herring. He goes off on this issue of Adoni here, which is not what the argument is about. The argument is, who is the Lord speaking to? Is it Adoni or Adonai? In this case, it's the word. And David says, the Targum interpretation says that it's about David, who is the ruler, master, the Rabbon. There's no disagreement there. But again, this is a red herring. Note to the underlying word decree. This is the word memra, the word that Dr. Garza wants to believe is replacing the Adoni of the Hebrew text. Replacing in the sense of God talking to. The Lord, Yahweh, is speaking to his word. It's not Adoni there. In fact, it affirms what I said, that David, if he wants to say David is the Rabbon, the Adoni there, then that's what the Targum is saying. Exactly agreeing with me that the tradition of the Targum, before it was Abraham, later on, that this was the rabbinic tradition. So in the synagogues, when they read Psalm 110:1 and they read the Targum, they're reading it about David, not about the Messiah. So I don't understand. He's just strengthening my position with this. It's amazing that he doesn't see this as he's writing it. That I have to point this out. But again, as he admitted, he's not trained in any way in academically, theologically, or anything formally. It's just his own research on Google. So this is, and probably what books he reads that agrees with his Unitarian position. But he quotes a Targum that agrees with me, which dates back to the time of Jesus and before, that they would have read this with the Hebrew scriptures in the synagogue to say, hey, this is about David. David is speaking about himself here. But that the Lord is speaking to the Word. Okay. That affirms what I said. In conclusion, we can safely conclude that Adoni is based on Rabbinic tradition. I'm sorry, but he did not even come close to proving any such thing. If you're reading it like he did, like he's writing it, if he's listening to my debate and this is how he's hearing it and interpreting it in his blog, yeah, it's a Unitarian one-eye interpretation of what I said. I hope you can see just how flawed and deficient Dr. Garza's opening presentation was in proving his case. So much for his opener. This is going to be interesting because he goes into other fallacies. I don't want to go too far into this. But he does talk about other fallacies that I supposedly committed that I thought was really humorous. I now want to show other fallacies used by Dr. Garza in the rest of the debate. And he had a timestamp here. Dr. Garza states emphatically that the New Testament Jesus is never once called kurios mu, the Greek rendering of Adoni, but this is manifestly false. No, that is not what I said. The argument was that Jesus in the New Testament, like in John and places, is hakurios mu, the Lord of me, not kyrios mu, the Lord. This has now the definite article, which in Hebrew could be ha'adon. That's what I said, that there is a difference between what they're calling Jesus now, ha'adon, the Lord, which is hakurios, which again affirms what I'm saying is that, now this was a moot point, but he wants to deal with it, that's fine. When I pointed this out to Garza in the comment section of the debate, he says that I already stated that in those verses, the Lord of me with the article in the different tense in Greek, and that you have other places where Jesus is called just Lord, like God the Father. Kurios is a generic word for Lord and can either be based on their belief. The Hebrew Pashita are more exact to Yahweh or Adonai. To Jesus, when I pointed out to Carlos, he did not refute. In other words, you could not translate Luke and John as to say to my Lord. It would be translated as the Lord of me. That is differently grammatically. The underlined section of the response is hard to make sense. He says different tense, but I think he means different cases. Yes, grammatically the tense and the cases, I was referring to that, saying it is now the Lord ha'adon, not just kirio to my Lord, or not to my Lord, kirio mu. But the meaning of the word does not change because the case is different. I never said that. I'm talking about adding the article, which you see with God himself, hakurios. Jesus is now also called hakurios, the Lord. Now, you can argue how you could translate that. I can argue that the closest thing to the Lord of me in Greek, hakurios mu, is Adonai, because Adonai literally means my Lord and is only derived or given to Yahweh himself as the Lord. Ha'adon is only used in the Old Testament for God, Yahweh himself. So if Jesus is equally called Ha'adon, you can't go to the Old Testament and find any human being called Ha'adon. It is only applied to God himself. So if Jesus is now in the Greek called hakurios, in Hebrew you can say ha'adon. In the Hebrew of the Lord of me, referring to a possessive of my Lord, it could be Adonai because, again, of the article, Adonai, my Lord, which is only derived to God. That was my point, which got sidetracked by over-talking with me and Carlos, and I couldn't clarify that because we kept moving on. It was doing Carlos's cross-examination. This person doesn't understand that because he doesn't know Hebrew, Aramaic, or Greek, or any of the languages Semitically in understanding how this could be applied. So that's why he's arguing against something that he himself does not understand. Now, you can't really say could you argue Adoni? Not from the New Testament of hakurios mu, the Lord of me, because again of the article presented here in the New Testament you don't find that. In the Old Testament, I believe you can, without in the Greek only, though, in the Greek, because in the Hebrew, ha'adon is only applied to God, the Lord. So you in the Septuagint, that's why I don't rely on the Septuagint as my authority, because it's a translation, and it's a much later translation and a very abstract language, pagan language of Greek, where Hebrew is the holy language of God. It is what was preserved in the Old Testament as Hebrew, and that's what we have to compare. So again, relying on strictly the Greek is very bad when it comes to trying to interpret certain passages. But again, I can argue Adonai for my Lord, because it's Hakurios Mu, the Lord of me. As I just said, Ha'adon. Again, he doesn't understand this. So, moving on. But even more than this, Jesus is called dozens of times Kurios, which means our Lord in the first person. Yes, yes, yes. So Jesus is called my Lord in the singular, our Lord in the plural many times in the New Testament. Dr. Garza is simply wrong. Again, he doesn't understand the language. He's in a whole different red herring going everywhere else. That's not what I was trying to say. Obviously, he missed the point. Again, Dr. Garza appeals to Peshitta, claiming that in Matthew 23:43, the Peshitta calls Jesus by the divine name Yahweh. Is this true? I have never heard this claim before this debate. Well, yeah, because you're not a trained scholar or a trained individual in the languages. So yeah, of course you would never have heard of this. So I did some checking to see if this claim is true. Okay, so now he's going to research it and look for Google articles or things that agree with him, or tries to. But here's what he says. What he is referring to is that in the Peshitta, the Aramaic word for Lord in Matthew 23:45 is Maria. It seems that there are a few scholars in the field of the Peshitta studies who have put forward the theory that Maria, a form of Mara, meaning Lord, is meant to designate the name of Yahweh. Hence, the Lord in Matthew 22, verse 43 and 45, which is referring to the Messiah, is supposed to be calling him Yahweh. What I said was, again, if you compare Psalm 110:1, where it says, the Lord said, or the Lord, Yahweh, Hakurios, Jesus, in the Peshitta, it's Maria. When you compare what Jesus said, he uses Maria there and Kurios as the opening to Psalm 110:1, describing what David said in the Spirit about the Messiah. That's irrefutable. The spelling in all the languages is there. So that's what I'm trying to say here, which he's not getting. So then he goes on to say, the claim is that Maria, Lord Yahweh, from what I can gather, apparently it's new to him, only some scholars take this position while others deny it. I don't know any scholar that denies that Psalm 110:1 opening, Maria, speaking of Yahweh, is not the same as Matthew 22 that Jesus said. It's the same spelling in the Peshitta. I don't know any scholar that denies that. That's all I was saying, that he didn't say Marie, which would have made more sense if he was referring to it that way. I don't know any scholar that denies that in Aramaic or in any sense of the word. Jesus said Maria, not Marie. And that Maria fits perfectly with not only the opening of Psalm 110, verse 1, the Lord Yahweh said, Maria. It also fits with verse 5 as Adonai. So again, you can argue Jesus is referring to both in that sentence of verse 1 and 5 of who the Messiah really is. But he doesn't, again, this is an untrained individual. He goes on to say, it is true that Maria is used throughout the Peshitta Old Testament and New Testament for the Tetragrammaton. Wow, really? That's what I said when you parallel Psalm 110 with Matthew 22. But this appears to be a substitution for the divine name like Kurios in Greek. Again, this depends on context. Context. Who is being referred to in the passage and what is being used there to identify him. Yahweh is Maria, Yahweh is Kurios, HaKurios, and that's what Jesus uses in parallel, quoting Psalm 1 when referencing David speaking of who he was speaking to before the actual Psalm 110 quote. So he's affirming what I already said. But this appears to be a substitution for the divine name, like Kurios in the Greek. Maria is most likely an equivalent of the Hebrew Adonai, which was used by the Jews as a substitute for Yahweh when reading or reciting the scriptures out loud. And like Adonai is an emphatic form of Adon, so Maria is the emphatic form of Mara. Kurios is an equivalent to Adonai, in Greek, and it seems to be the best way to understand Maria is an equivalent to Adonai in Aramaic. That Maria occurs a few times with reference to Jesus in the New Testament is extrapolated by the proponents of this view to mean that Jesus is being called Yahweh. But then he quotes somebody here. I don't know who this person is, Dr. Rocco and Errico, a former student of Dr. George Lamsa, takes a more sensible approach. And now he's going to try to find scholars to say, again, red herring, say something different, but he's just admitted that, yes, this does happen, yes. And I'm paralleling Psalm 110:1 with Matthew 22. I'm not using it generically, like kurios and all that. I'm paralleling, a real parallel here between the references of each other and how Jesus used the word according to the Greek and the Aramaic and even in the Hebrew. So this part right here, to me, is a red herring again, because you're going to find scholars who are going to say, yes, Maria can also not be a substitute and used in other ways. And well, that's not what we're saying here. Just like hakurios can refer to other individuals, or kurios can refer to people and refer to God. We're not denying that, and I'm not denying that. I'm saying in the parallel context of Psalm 110:1 and Matthew 22, this is what you find. That when they put Maria for Yahweh, it's what Jesus says that David said in the Spirit, not Marie. That has not been addressed and refuted here. He's again red herring it all over the place here. So he quotes this person by saying, when the Aramaic for Maria is used, it may refer to either the Lord God or to a highest ranking Lord of Lords. For instance, Jesus was called by the people, my Lord. Mar from the word Mara, Lord, Master, Sir. The term Maria was substituted for the Hebrew word Yahweh, which refers to the Lord God only. But on a few occasions, the Messiah is called Maria, as in what I quoted, 24, because he is the highest Lord among men. That's an interpretation. Again, he's giving a scholar or somebody who's agreeing with a false interpretation, in my opinion, because if you go to Psalm 110, the parallels match. Psalm 110:1 in the Aramaic is Maria said to Marie, and Jesus says that David said in the Spirit, Maria, twice in verse 43 and 45. And I was arguing that the Psalm quote is a rabbinic tradition, not from the words of Jesus, but from the scribe who's following Messianic tradition of Adoni. So again, this is an interpretation. God is the Lord of the Messiah. I mean, this is... It affirms what I said, but it doesn't want to parallel the two passages that confirm what I said. They're doing a red herring. Oh, but over here, let me give you my other interpretation. The validity of Dr. Errico's perspective can be seen in the absurdities that would result in Maria when used of Jesus, meant to signify him as Yahweh. Again, doesn't deal with the parallel. That's exactly how Psalm 10:1 reads with what Jesus said. Take, for example, Act. Therefore, let all the people of Israel understand beyond a doubt that God made this Jesus, whom you crucified, both Lord and Messiah. The Peshitta has Maria for the word Lord, which, if we take it to mean Yahweh, would result in this. Therefore, let all the people of Israel understand beyond a doubt that God made this Jesus, whom you crucified, both Yahweh and Messiah. I have no problem with that, but he does, because why? God made the man Jesus, Yahweh. If you don't understand the incarnation, as Paul states, that Jesus was in the form of God before, and that he emptied himself, he left and gave up his position of glory as God, as the word of the Lord, as God, and became the form of a servant, and said, did not think it robbery to hold on to that position. Yes, at the resurrection, he made him Messiah again, and Yahweh again. Messiah in the sense that he now has fulfilled the resurrection, becoming Messiah and Adonai, restoring what he had before. This is what Philippians 2 verse 5 through 8 give you. That's what John 1:1 talks about. So yes, he made Jesus Yahweh and Messiah, or Adonai Messiah, because he gave it up to be a servant, to be a man. That's why Jesus says, I have come down from heaven in John chapter 6. He was in heaven and he came down. He was the word of the Lord. What kind of nonsense is that? Well, if you're a Unitarian, and of course you're going to think it's nonsense, because it doesn't fit your theology and you don't understand the incarnation. So if you deny that Jesus existed prior as the Word, as the eternal Word of God, then of course it's going to be like nonsense. But if you understand the incarnation, what Jesus gave up, how he was a man, but yet he was still divine in his original nature, as Paul tells you in Philippians 2, then you're going to think it's nonsense, because you're not trained to understand that from the language. Another example, he goes to Romans. Anyway, he misquote. He's giving this stuff, again, out of ignorance. Okay, so as we finish up here, Dr. Garza's perspective is that Dr. Garza's perspective is that just as he thinks that Jesus is being called Kurios in the Greek names, he is Yahweh, because Kurios is used as a substitute name for the divine name in both the Septuagint and New Testament. So likewise, that Jesus is also called Maria, and the Beshita means it is Yahweh, because Maria is used as a substitute divine name in the Beshita of the Old Testament, New Testament. But he's mistaken on both counts. No, I'm making a real parallel between Psalm 110:1 and what Jesus is saying in regards to Psalm 110:1 and what he did not say, which would support their view if he did say Marie in Kidiomu, which he doesn't. So again, a red herring. I'm not making this a whole New Testament, Old Testament translation or meaning behind what I'm saying here. I am isolating it with the parallels between those Matthew 22 and Psalm 110:1, which he again does not address. He's red herring it as if I'm making it universal. The words Kurios and Maria by have meaning beyond their use as a substitute for the divine name. I never said they didn't. I agree with that. And he goes to Acts 22, blah, blah, blah. Again, red herring. I never said it didn't. I never said you can't use Maria for anybody else or Kurios for anybody else but God. I never said that. In my review, I made that clear. It's generic form because Greek is very abstract. Hebrew is more concrete, so you got to look at what the Hebrew is saying in the context and then translate that into the Greek and say, okay, how did the Greek use it? So in Psalm 110:1, when it says Yahweh said, it's Kurios and Maria. That's what Jesus says in parallel to Psalm 110 that David said in the Spirit before the psalm is quoted. That's all I'm saying. That's a direct parallel connection that he's not addressing. I never said that it was only used for that. He's assuming and asserting that that's kind of what I'm meaning, and I'm not. It has to be done in context and how it's being mentioned, and in this case, it is Psalm 110:1 and Matthew 22. So then he deals with this part here, which is kind of what we already talked about. I don't really like to get into this too much, because he just kind of goes over the same things, but he ignores everything I said. He quotes Matthew 22 in context here, the way I did. Orthodox Trinitarian Christians are nearly universal in the belief that the only way to make sense of this passage is to see Jesus as affirming that the Messiah is himself God, and that is why David could call him Lord. In other words, the Messiah must be more than David's son or descendants. If David calls him Lord, he must also be David's God, or David's Adonai, my Lord, which is what the literal Hebrew means. This is merely an assumption on the part of those who already presuppose that Jesus is God. Well, you presuppose Jesus is just a man, and that's all you've done here is put your presuppositions into this, because you've never addressed anything I said. You ignored everything I said, and your conclusion is your premise, and your premise is your conclusion. So you can accuse me of that, but again, you've done the same thing if that's what you want to hold to. It talks about that. Let's see, the first point I wanted to look at this words of Jesus in this passage gives the impression that he is challenging the popular belief of the Jews that the Messiah would be a descendant. Again, he's going to give his interpretation of this now, which again, he's entitled to. That's fine, but when he fails to really answer my arguments and does a lot of red herrings and things I didn't say or things I didn't mean, then all this is meaningless. You can hold your interpretation, but you haven't refuted anything I said. You've gone beyond what I said to try and point to things that I never said or never assumed or tried to say in a very red herring way. So you misrepresented me as far as from the Hebrew, because you don't know Hebrew, you don't know Aramaic, and you don't know Greek, and you have to rely on third parties to tell you what they believe, only if it affirms your Unitarian position. Let's see here. I think that's pretty much it. So he goes on to say, well, the Jews of that day did not know in that it was hidden from them as well the fact that Messiah would be rejected by the people, put to death, yada yada. So again, he gives his footnotes here. Not really much, just one article that does affirm what I say in connection to Psalm 110 when it's a parallel, but of course it makes other claims that I never even made. It's kind of useless. I will put this blog up with this video so you can read it for yourself and if you want to look at it yourself. But I had to address this because this person took a lot of time here and he wanted me to post it with my channel, and I said no, I need to read it and I'll respond to it and then I'll post it so people can compare my answer to this, who this person Troy is. Again, as you can see, I I have no formal theological education. Okay, well, that you can definitely see that in this whole article. So I know this is a long video. I appreciate if you took the time to listen to it all. I hope you got a lot out of it. I did respond to this. I want you to understand that this person misrepresents the Hebrew, misrepresents what I said in context. He does a lot of red herring and going off on other things that I did not say and conclude. He doesn't give the correct translations for Adonai. I wanted to make one point. When he says Adonai, and I say Adonai is my Lord and my Lord, you do have in Genesis 19:2 and Genesis 19 verse 18 where Adonai is translated as my Lord's, plural. Because that, again, Adonai is plural. When you have a verb or an adjective that is plural in Hebrew, it modifies the plural noun to either plural or, if it's singular, to a plural. So the modifiers, the verb and adjectives have to modify the noun. So in other words, if you have a singular God, El, and the verb is plural, well, let me put it this way. If you have a plural Elohim, plural gods, and the verb or adjective is singular, it would say God singular. It modifies that from the plural and turns it into a singular. Vice versa, if you have a singular, it can be changed to a plural based on the verb or the adjective. Well, in some places, like in Genesis 19:2 and Genesis 19 verse 18, Adonai is changed to my Lord's, plural. And so and even in Genesis 18:3, the Hebrew for when it says that Abraham went to greet the three men, greet them is plural, that verb, it modifies Adonai there to my Lord's, even though they translate it still as my Lord. Grammatically in the Hebrew, it should say my Lord's because he's greeting them. So they didn't change that modification there, which I understand probably why, but it is understood as being my Lord's there. And that is, again, to the three men. But in Genesis 19, verse 18, and in verse 2, it is my Lord's, plural, as Adonai. So that is how that's how we understand this. So, again, this person doesn't understand, because he's not trained by his own admittance, that he's not trained in any of these areas. So he misrepresents everything I just said here. So this response is based on that. He took the time, and so I needed to address it. And again, I know it went quite a bit longer than I expected, and I appreciate the time you guys are taking to watch this. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave them here. You can email me. But again, this is my response to this person who wrote this, who again is just looking at it from a Unitarian position and did not represent me at all. And even some of the comments, which I was surprised, some of the comments like, "Oh, great research," and glad you there was no research. This person, again, is searching the internet for his answers that fit what he thinks it should say, and he doesn't address my arguments. He does a lot of, I say this because it's true, red herring. If you don't know what that means, just look it up. It's a red herring. He's not addressing anything, and he doesn't know what a parallel is if he's doing it the way he did it with 1 Peter. So again, take the time, educate, to look at this. These people are only giving him praises because they agree with him as Unitarians, but they have no idea how to look at this and say, okay, this is not what I meant. Or let me just say this. I even emailed Troy and said, call me, and I'll explain to you from your blog where I disagree with you in representing me. He didn't want anything to do with it. He said, no, he doesn't want to call me. He thinks his blog is enough. And so he asked me to point out where I think this is it. You don't want to talk to me, so I'll do it this way. So this is my response to him. So I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got a lot out of it. Understand my position, refuting him, who is trying to refute me by misrepresenting me. So listen, thank you for tuning in. Question, comments down below. Like, share, and subscribe. But I want to say thank you for watching, and God bless, and talk to you soon.
Bible Answers with Dr. Al Garza.